the philosopher of eternal return. In the early 18th century, Giambattista Vico stood against the tide of the Enlightenment. While his contemporaries viewed history as a linear march of progress driven by reason, Vico perceived something deeper, a spiritual rhythm pulsing beneath human events. In his monumental work, The New Science, he proposed that civilizations are not random or mechanical, but living organisms moved by divine spirit. History, he said, is consciousness unfolding, the slow awakening of humanity to its own divine nature. Just as a single life moves through birth, growth, death, and renewal, so too do societies pass through cyclical ages of awakening, decline, and rebirth. For Vico, God was not an external ruler watching from afar, but the eternal intelligence expressing itself through the collective drama of history. The living cosmos of history. Vico believed that history is not a collection of disconnected events, but a living cosmos, an organism of consciousness evolving through time. Every civilization, he said, mirrors a stage in humanity's spiritual development. The myths, laws, languages, and institutions of each culture are the visible forms of an invisible principle, the divine mind expressing itself through human imagination. For Vico, this is what makes history sacred. It is not simply human action shaped by chance, but the unfolding of divine providence through the fabric of time. The historian's task, therefore, is not just to record events, but to read the soul of history, to discern how God's presence manifests in the rise and fall of civilizations, in the poetry of myths, and even in the moral struggles of ordinary people. The three ages of humanity. At the core of Vico's philosophy lies his theory of the three ages, the cyclical stages through which every civilization passes. The age of gods, when divine imagination dominates and humanity lives in awe of the sacred. The age of heroes, when power, honor, and mythic grandeur define human order. The age of men, when reason awakens, laws are codified, and societies become rational, but also skeptical, self-centered, and spiritually disconnected. Once the cycle reaches its limit, when reason becomes arrogance and wisdom is lost, collapse follows. Yet this decline is not the end. From chaos arises a new sacred beginning, and the cycle begins again. In this vision, history is not linear progress, but eternal renewal. Each age is a mirror of consciousness, God experiencing the fullness of creation through the evolving mind of humanity. The imagination as the birthplace of the divine. Unlike many philosophers of his time, Vico did not dismiss myth as primitive ignorance. He saw it as the language of divine consciousness in its earliest form. Myths, symbols, and rituals are how the human soul first expresses its contact with the sacred. In the age of gods, people did not think abstractly. They felt the divine in thunder, in harvest, in the rhythm of the stars. Imagination was revelation. Over time, as language evolved, myth gave way to rational thought. But something was lost. Vico warned that when reason severs itself from imagination, humanity forgets its origin in divine participation. True wisdom, therefore, requires the reconciliation of myth and reason, heart and intellect. Through this union, we rediscover that knowledge is not domination, but communion with the living spirit of the world, providence and the hidden order of time. Vico's idea of divine providence was revolutionary. He rejected the notion of a distant God intervening from outside the world. Instead, he saw providence as immanent order, the divine logic unfolding through every event. Even war, chaos, and decline, he said, serve a higher purpose, the purification and renewal of consciousness. In Vico's universe, nothing is meaningless. What seems like destruction is often transformation, the clearing of space for new creation. History, therefore, is the theater of divine evolution. humanity learning, forgetting, and remembering its spiritual essence. Providence guides this journey, not as an external command, but as inner necessity, the same force that draws a seed toward light or a soul toward wisdom. The spiral of eternal return. Vico described history not as a perfect circle, but as a spiral. Each return to the sacred carries the imprint of what came before. This spiral reveals the progress of divine self-awareness within humanity. Every cycle refines the expression of consciousness, a deeper compassion, a broader understanding, a clearer reflection of the divine within the human. This vision transforms the tragedies of history into spiritual stages. Rome's rise and fall, the Middle Ages, the Enlightenment, all become movements in a single cosmic symphony. Through these rhythms, God contemplates himself in time. Vico's insight anticipated modern ideas in psychology, systems theory, and even quantum philosophy, that creation is not static but self-aware process, perpetually evolving toward unity. Humanity as the mirror of God. In the end, Vico's philosophy invites us to see ourselves not as observers of history, but as participants in the cosmic awakening of divine consciousness. Every human act, from invention to art, from tragedy to triumph, is part of the divine mind's self-expression. The historian, the artist, the mystic, and the scientist are all instruments of this awakening. To live consciously for Vico is to recognize that our lives are threads in an eternal tapestry woven by spirit. The cycles of civilization mirror the cycles of the soul, birth, fall, renewal, and through it all, the divine remains constant, the living intelligence that becomes conscious through us. History, then, is not merely about the past. It is the ongoing revelation of God in motion, the infinite learning to know itself through the finite. The eternal return of the divine Giambattista. Vico offered one of the most profound and mystical visions of history ever conceived. He saw time as God's consciousness unfolding through humanity, each age a reflection of the divine seeking to know itself. In our age of uncertainty, his insight is more relevant than ever, that civilization's crises are not endings, but renewals, signs that the eternal spirit is once again moving through the human story. To understand history, then, is not to study what has passed. It is to perceive the living presence of God in every moment of creation, death, and rebirth. The divine is not beyond time. It is becoming through time, and we are its awakening.